Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your own online shop stage to the first real life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify's there to help you grow. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to the other leading commerce platforms. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. Shopify.com/promo.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I'm going to say hello again. Hello! And welcome to The Price of Football. Hello. The reason I do that, Kieran, is because I went for a drink with some fans of the pod just a couple of days ago, and they were slightly concerned because they thought that the last two podcasts I'd said hello in a rather less cheery fashion. And they wondered if there was anything wrong with me. So I just wanted to reassure them. I went, hello! So I'm going to be like a one-show presenter now, Kieran, for the whole of the pod. I'm going to put a massive smile on my face and go, hello! Or Blue Peter, one of those. I don't think they have Blue Peter anymore, do they?
I don't think so.
Oh. How's your weekend, Kieran?
Well, I've got a couple of Blue Peter stories, but I probably can't tell them, actually. So, yeah, how was my weekend? Yeah, my weekend was good.
Hang on a second. This is not you and the Blue Peter Garden story, is it? You and
Oh, no.
You and Les Ferdinand getting over the wall. And how are the Foo Fighters? Did they manage to get stairlifted onto stage all right?
They were absolutely brilliant. Dave Grohl is the ultimate showman, the ultimate frontman, and he knows when and how to get the crowd interacting on individual songs. Some of the stuff was a bit more serious, a bit more personal. Played for 3 hours. Fantastic gig. It was impressive. It's amazing how much noise the London Stadium could make as well.
It's questions day, Kieran. But before we get into your questions, on Thursday's pod, we mentioned that players' unions from England and France have launched legal action against FIFA over its expanded Club World Cup. After we recorded the pod, you managed to speak to Maheta Malango, managing director of the PFA, about it. He was literally getting on a plane to Germany, but he had a couple of things to tell you, Kieran, didn't he?
That's right, and it was good of him to get in contact. So he's going to come on the show a bit later in the summer, and we'll have a much longer chat. But I think we've now reached breaking point as far as the players' unions are concerned. The decision by FIFA to introduce the World Club Championship without any consultation, without any form of collective bargaining, as far as the players were concerned, is a step too far. And I think what we might be seeing is some form of class action from the union on behalf of their members to protect their interests. They will be looking at issues such as the European Court of Justice and Article 17, as far as the Human Rights Charter is concerned. And I know there'll be lots of people going, boo-hoo, they earn a lot of money. But hold on, they're entitled to a holiday a year. Why shouldn't they? They should not be treated as forced labour in the sense that all of a sudden we've got another half a dozen matches we've decided to squeeze into the calendar, get on with it. So it does look as if things are starting to move forwards. And there's been one issue which I think has been sort of going underneath the radar. And this is a legal case brought by, I think, a player called Diarra, who went from Real Madrid to play in Russia, and he decided he didn't want to play in Russia. And that's understandable for circumstances. But the Russian club that he plays for has his registration. And no other club in Europe was willing to take him on because they feared being sued by the Russian club. And they didn't want to be joint and severally liable. So, he'd agreed terms, I think, with a club in Belgium, but they said, we're concerned we could be threatened here. So, therefore, he's using the John Mark Bosman lawyer to effectively say, is the transfer system legal or illegal? Because isn't it a form of forced labour? If you or I have a job and we want to move on elsewhere, well, you've got an agreed period of notice, and you hand in your notice, and you go to work for a new employer. You're not paid compensation fee for moving elsewhere, and so on. If this is successful, where does it leave FIFA and UEFA? Because they're not the employer of the players, so therefore, how can they force the players to play in these tournaments? They are, in theory, just tournament organisers, and they feel that there's a conflict of interest coming from both FIFA and UEFA, because you can't be a regulator and a competition organiser. And ironically, this is the argument that's also been put forward by those in favour of Super League. So there's a lot going on. I think the view is this could be a sideline, in the sense that the transfer rules, as we have them at present, could be deemed to be anti-competitive, and it could open up a huge can of worms, and it could certainly strengthen the position of the players if ruled in their favour.
Did you say it was the same lawyer who represented John Mark Bosman?
Yes, that's my understanding. Yeah.
Wow, then I'm amazed he's still working. You'd take the rest of your career off, wouldn't you? Just travel around Europe, sitting in cafes, lighting £5 notes with cigars, saying, I did the Bosman thing. Maheta, I'm looking forward to speaking to, Kieran, but I think the one big takeaway was this is about player welfare. This is all the PFA and the French Players Association are concerned about, is the amount of games that players are being forced to play, basically, to the detriment of their physical and sometimes mental welfare as well.
It is, and I think I was reading one of the newspapers over the weekend, and it compared the number of minutes of play that Jude Bellingham has made. He's only 20, I think, and compared that to other well-known players. Football is a career that we all envy. It's something every football fan would love to be a footballer. Nobody's denying that.
Of course.
But there's no reason why it can't be an enjoyable career and a long career as well. And we've seen players such as Rodri say, I can't physically do this. And, Rodri is probably the best player in football, in the sense that if you take a look at the number of victories that Manchester City have had with and without him, there's a significant difference. It's exactly the same for Spain as well. And therefore, both his national side and his club side, whom he is very proud to represent, there's no denying that, because of the way that the system is operating. And of course, we've now got more matches taking place in the Champions League from next season. You and I, we're both old enough to remember when the Euros was 8 teams. And then it went to 16. Now it's gone to 24. It is the next step, 32. And that means there's more and more matches and there's more and more demands being played. And it's this creep of expansion of tournaments. It doesn't have to be that way. If you take a look at the NFL, which generates more money than the Premier League, which generates more money than the Champions League, they've got 18 games a season. Yeah. So why are owners trying to squeeze more and more out of elite athletes? It just seems that the focus is very much on what's best for the owners and not best necessarily for the game or for the players themselves. If you take a look at the FA Cup final and the Champions League final, let's be honest, they were both a bit crap. The players are running at 70 or 80% of their ability because they're nursing injuries and they're exhausted following a full season. And we end up watching mediocre football as a result. I can't remember the last Champions League final where I went away and said, God, that was clearly the best 2 clubs in Europe, absolutely going toe-to-toe.
Yeah, interesting. And a question we will have to put to Maheta, of course, as well, is that they need to be looking at club. There will be a lot of people listening to this going, well, why aren't the PFA trying to sue clubs for making players go twice around the world in 2 weeks in the summer? Because obviously there are financial implications for the clubs, but that's something we'll put to Maheta. But also a really interesting piece in The Athletic yesterday saying that the Club World Cup could be a real nail in the coffin for AFCON, because it looked like the only window you could play it would be around about January, February, when AFCON is normally being played. And so then the top-class African players are going to be having to make a decision whether to go for their country or their club.
Or you shift AFCON to the summer, which,
Yeah.
and then
Okay.
again, it's more players not getting a break, because you got Olympics, World Cup, AFCON now in the summer, and so on.
Questions, Kieran. We got some very interesting ones, including one about my favourite tournament, Kieran. You never thought you'd hear those words, did you? And our first question comes from Luke Gormley. And Luke said, I'm sure I know Luke Gormley. I know Gormley. I'm thinking statues in the sea at Southport. But Luke, do I know you? Have we met? But Luke Gormley says, do some clubs have their own hard salary caps in place? And what other common wage structures are employed at clubs?
Yes, I think they do have hard salary caps, in the sense that the board of directors will sit down with a manager during the close season or before that and say, this is our total budget for the forthcoming season. And this is your sandpit. This is what you can go and play with. Now, you can improve that if you manage to sell some players, but we won't necessarily give you 100% of the proceeds. We might only give you 50%. And in terms of player recruitment, I think they'd encourage the managers to take a look at things on a more holistic basis. So you can sign somebody on a Bosman and pay them, say, 50 grand a week, or you can sign somebody on a £10 million deal, but under those circumstances, we can only afford to pay him £15,000 a week, and it's now up to you. So it becomes a bit like a computer game, a bit like a giant puzzle, where you're trying to work out within the total budget how much can be spent, and that does sort of become a hard salary cap overall, in the sense that you'd normally say to the manager, historically, 60% of your budget's gone on wages and 40% on transfers. Now, if you want to go and tweak that, that's your call. But we'll probably still sack you if you lose 3 or 4 matches, regardless of what happens. So it is something which is discussed. At the back of the minds of the board of directors is that they are fully aware that we've got cost control measures, although we will be talking on the Thursday show about what can be described as sort of a fiscal circle jerk that's taking place with regards to some very unusual transfers which just happen, which perfectly within the rules, by the way. Yeah. But eyebrows being raised. No rules have been broken in any of this, but we'll take a look in more depth as we approach the 30th of June, which is now becoming a transfer window within a transfer window, because it coincides with fiscal year ends. So that's the position for Luke.
Sorry to interrupt, Kieran, but would that be the Villa Everton?
Yeah, and Villa Chelsea, and perhaps and sometimes we've got triangles.
Yeah, it's just I know, because I wake up in the morning, I check Twitter X, and it's just like, I don't know, Villa, Everton, Chelsea seem to be up to something. I look forward to what Kieran's got to say about that, and I close the phone and go back to sleep, basically. And what about Luke's second part of the question, the common wage structures employed at clubs?
I think what some clubs try to do is they don't want there to be disharmony at clubs. So therefore, they will have a wage structure. I know Burnley, for example, when they were in the Premier League, their wage structure was a very, very narrow cap and collar in terms of the difference between the highest paid player and the lowest paid player was probably no more than £5,000 a week.
Oh, okay.
And this was, I think this was during sort of the Sean Dyche era at Burnley. And this was very much to create an environment in the dressing room of all for one and one for all. There was no Charlie Big Potatoes were being signed, and the players were effectively cut from a similar cloth and paid a similar wage. Whereas we see at other clubs, it's more of a Galacticos-driven wage structure, and that can cause problems, because if you've just worked your socks off and you've got a diva next to you who's on twice as much money because he's a more famous player, it can cause resentment. So it is something which is discussed, again, between the board of directors and the manager in terms of the culture of the dressing room, which can make a difference, both positive and negative.
Yeah. Persistent rumours from Palace fans, Kieran, you'd hear it at least once a week in Portsmouth Arms, that they knew for a fact that Wilfred Zaha's contract had a clause which said he has to be paid more than £10,000 a week, more than the next highest paid player at the club. And Benteke had to be paid £5,000 a week, more than the player below him. And you just say to people, how do you know that? What? Oh, I just heard it from a bloke at the club who apparently has access to their wage structure. But it's not beyond the realms of impossibility that a player like Zaha would have that in his contract, I presume, then, is it?
It is. I think there was and you do hear these types of stories. I know there was a big issue at Newcastle, I think, when Duncan Ferguson joined, and he was being paid more than Alan Shearer, and I think Alan Shearer was less than enamoured with such an approach. So yeah, there is, footballers they're elite athletes for a reason. Part of the reason is that they've all got egos. They know that they're good, and that's why you end up with some of the issues that we have seen. So I think it was the case, and it goes back to our favourite football story, which was Tom Ince's mum. I think the rumour at the time was that there was a couple of players at Derby whose contract said that if anybody comes in on a higher wage than us, we must have an automatic pay rise so that we are paid equal to the highest paid player. And of course, if you go and pay a player's mother, that means that the player's not getting paid, which means you have to give pay rises to those other things. So yeah, we're sort of entering that three-dimensional chess environment, which appears to be now sort of not determining, but certainly having an influence over the transfer market, as we were talking about the 30th of June.
To be fair, Kieran, when it comes to Alan Shearer, less than enamoured is his default setting. That's pretty much how he wakes up in the morning, and let's see if his day gets better. Although he's a liberated man doing his podcast with Lineker and Micah Richards. He's very funny.
Hi, I'm Steve Lamack, and every week I'm joined by Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge, on The Price of Music, the weekly podcast all about the money behind the music industry. In each episode, we discuss the very latest goings-on in the music business and dig into the finances behind the big stories.
So whether you're a music lover who just wants to know more about what really goes on in the industry, or you're an aspiring musician, manager or label owner who wants some inside knowledge on how Spotify's financial model really works, or what the future holds for independent live music venues, this is a show for you.
Subscribe to The Price of Music in your podcast app now. See you soon.
Robert Ryan has a question which I suppose is similar in a way, Kieran. How are transfer budgets decided? Is it a percentage of profit? And are outstanding transfer payments taken into account? And obviously outstanding transfer payments is something we've spoken about quite a lot recently.
Yes, I think if we look at that second question first from Robert, the transfer budget is linked to cash flow. Now, if you have substantial amounts of money already owing in relation to players who have been previously acquired, that will have an impact. Yeah, it's a bit like, can I afford to go and buy something on my credit card? Well, if I've already got substantial balance outstanding on my credit card, then I've got to go and pay so much each month, and therefore that might have an impact upon my ability to go and buy something which is new. And I know this has been a bit of an issue, but Leeds fans are sort of taken against me when I pointed out that they owe £190 million. Well, they owed £190 million at the end of June 23. And I say, it's not a problem in the sense that the club is well run, but it does have an impact upon the ability to sell, or the ability to buy going forwards. So transfer payments would be taken into account in trying to get the timing of deals right. And what it could mean, it could have an impact upon a deal whereby you've got the choice of signing two players. Let's say both of those players, they could potentially cost you £30 million. And in deal one, the selling club wants £20 million up front. And in deal two, the selling club's willing to accept £5 million up front and more instalments later, and perhaps a couple of add-ons thrown in to make the deal a bit sweeter. So it certainly can impact things from that perspective. Is it a percentage of profit? Probably not. It's actually more to do with PSR, financial fair play, whatever you want to call it. That is very much the driver these days of a club's ability to spend. And then there's a third issue in the room. Given that the vast majority of clubs are losing money on a month-to-month, year-by-year basis, how are those losses being covered? It's either through player sales or increasingly it's owners. So how much is the owner willing to subsidise the club this year will have an impact upon the transfer budget. And fans say speculate to accumulate quite often, but they're saying that in respect of somebody else's money. I'm quite happy to go and say to somebody, well, yeah, go for it. Yeah, it's not my money, so there's no skin in the game for me, and it's the same as us fans. Yeah, and I do find that perhaps we are operating double standards as fans. That if the clubs say, well, we don't want to spend money because either we don't have it or because of PSR, the fans get agitated. And if you go and ask the fans to go and pay an extra 20 pence for a pack of Starburst at the start of the season, it's kicking off because the clubs don't understand the fans' fiscal position. So, I think we need to, as fans ourselves, to be more realistic in our ambitions. But everybody wants to spend somebody else's money. That's part of being a football fan.
I suppose, Kieran, if Leeds owe £190 million in outstanding transfer payment, it's not necessarily a problem for them, but it could be a problem for the other clubs that they owe the money to, couldn't it?
It could be. I mean, I know they had to go and I think it's 78 million of that was due by the 30th of June 2024, and we're practically there, and there's been no indication that Leeds haven't made the payment. So it just means that you've got to have good cash management, and in my view, Leeds do. So, but it's at the same time, if you owe a lot of money to other people, it restricts your ability to go and spend uninhibited amounts in the future.
Now, Paul Eardley. Actually, I'm going to sound even more cheerful, Kieran, so to reassure those people I mentioned at the top. Paul Eardley. I sound cheerful because this is the question, Kieran. Paul Eardley says, my question to you guys would be that subject to the arranging fixtures not being an issue, do you think there would be a financial benefit for teams in the lower divisions to revive the Anglo Italian Cup? And if so, would there be an appetite for the TV companies to show these games? Now, Kieran, do you know the outcome of the first final of the Anglo Italian Cup in 1970?
I don't, Kevin, but I'd love to find that out.
Well, Google it, Kieran. I'm not here to answer your questions. It's I've just realised the power you have. You could just say, Google it, look it up. I told you that 2 years ago. The first Anglo-Italian Cup final, Kieran, was abandoned after 78 minutes with the score Napoli 0, Swindon 3. And the Napoli fans took against the fact that Swindon were beating them in their own patch. In 1971, a certain South London team, Kieran, drew with Inter Milan at home and then beat them away.
Fantastic.
And Inter Milan's manager described it as the best European performance he'd ever seen by an English club.
Wow.
Unfortunately, we beat Cagliari at home and we lost. But such was the nature of the tournament's rules that you qualified on the number of goals scored and not the number of points. So even though we had more points than any other, I mean, that's just typical Palace even back then. We had more points than most clubs, but it didn't score as many goals. Yeah, the original Anglo-Italian Cup was the brainchild of an agent called Gigi Pirinacci back in the 70s, who looked after Jimmy Greaves in Milan and decided that there was money to be made. But it's still, it's for all Palace fans, even if they're 3 years old, their nostrils twitch and tears come to their eyes when you mention the Anglo-Italian Cup, Kieran, because it's the closest we've ever come in any tournament, and we didn't qualify for the finals. So that shows you how close we've got to it, to the others. But do you think, I can't imagine, reverse back to our conversation right at the start of the show about Maheta, I can't imagine there'd be any great enthusiasm for another tournament shoved into the summer, would there?
I suspect not, especially if you think that there's so many lower league clubs who are, going back to some of our previous questions, who are putting their squads together over the course of the summer. So we know that Morecambe, I think they had 5 players at the end of last season. So that would have been a struggle. If the numbers are right from a monetary point of view, then potentially it might work. But my concern would be, if you take a look at the 3 sources of revenue, Matchday, if I'm a Carlisle fan, if I am a Swindon fan, would I be interested in a match against Brescia or Calgary or something like that? Possibly not. Yeah, people are already spending an awful lot of money on football. So there's limited opportunities in terms of match day, unless you get to the finals. Otherwise, it becomes a bit like the first round of the League Cup. I don't know about your attitude, and it's a terrible thing for me to admit. I'm a bit more relaxed than I perhaps have been historically. In terms of, we've been knocked out of the League Cup. Oh, well, whereas it should matter more. So I think there'll be an interest in terms of ticket sales unless you get to the further reaches. From a TV point of view, I don't think there is the money in it. There tends to be some major sporting events taking place over the summer. So therefore, the budgets of the likes of TNT and Sky, they're more likely to go for cricket, tennis, golf, some of what you might refer to as summer sports. And there's enough interest in football gossip to probably mean that Sky Sports News have got more than enough stories compared to the need to have another tournament. Sponsors, I'm not convinced sponsors would see a significant advantage there. So you've got modest increases in revenue. And then from a costing point of view, you've got transport, you've got accommodation, you've got security. As you just said, Napoli fans didn't take too kindly to Swindon winning it. And you might say, well, things have changed since. Having been to Rome 3 months ago, things haven't changed. So I'm not convinced that there is a financial benefit to it. But if a sponsor comes along and plonks down a huge amount of money, then we'll see what happens. But I also, I take into consideration what you've just said. Players are already playing 46 league games. They've got the EFL Cup as well, which is meaning that quite a few first teamers now having to play in that competition. You've got the regular cup competitions. How is it going to be squeezed in?
And Sky Sports News are short of stories over the summer, Kieran. They just make them up. That's the easy way out of that one. What you refer to as the first round of the League Cup, Kieran, we refer to as the latter round of the League Cup in general. I'll tell you what I'd bring back. I'd bring back the Watties Cup. Remember the Watties Cup?
Oh, yeah. That was great.
The Watties Cup, which was the 4 teams that finished top of each division, plus the 4 teams that scored most goals. And I remember Man United playing Halifax.
Yes, I remember that as well. About 70, 71, wasn't it?
Yeah. And it's like the season started 2 weeks before. This is great. We've still got Australian football games on the Pools coupon, but Man United playing Halifax. Steve Giles has our next question, Kieran. Kind of gentler times, weren't they, Kieran, when you're reminiscing about watching Man United play Halifax on a pitch that even in August was just a mud bath, basically. Steve Giles says, with Tony Fernandes selling his QPR shares last year, what impact has this had on Rangers, and do we know who bought those shares?
Yeah, as far as those shares are concerned, they have gone to, by the looks of things, Total Soccer Growth Incorporated, which gets me slight twitchy at the word soccer. So I think this is a Malaysian gentleman called Ruben, excuse my pronunciation, Nanalingam. And I think the important thing is, as a result of the changes at the top of QPR, Ruben now has around about 60% ownership. And there's 2 other, is it Matal? Certainly there's an Indian owner and there's another owner who've got the other 40%. So we do have a majority owner. What we've seen at QPR is, I love Loftus Road as an away fan.
Yeah, great stadium.
Proper stadium. It's losing £20 million a year.
Wow.
And it's doing that year in, year out. We have seen quite a few of the loans from the owners converted into shares, and this has sort of tidied things up. The club's now got a new chief executive and it's got a new chair, I think, have come in. So there have been changes in terms of the way that the club's being run. It looks as if the majority owner is also keen to invest in facilities. I think there's been money being spent on training facilities and so on. So, a cautious step forward here. You know from your own experiences of Palace is that if you have shared ownership and there is nobody that has more than 50%, it can create blockages, it can create conflicts within the board. Whereas if we've got a new situation here with Tony Fernandes going, you've now got a majority owner, they can start to push things through with a greater degree of certainty.
James Simcox has our next question. It's got a bit of detail in it, but it's a good question. James Simcox says, could EFL clubs look at contracts similar to sports entertainment contracts, where players earn a set minimum per year, open brackets, known as a downside guarantee, close brackets, which is topped up by other clauses written in their contract, i.e. if a player plays more than X amount of games in the season or scores more than X amount of goals. Could this be an alternative to pay-as-you-play contracts for players who historically have an injury record? And is there any reason, Kieran, why James would specify EFL clubs in that question?
No, I don't see why this couldn't apply also to the SPFL, to the National League, and indeed the Premier League. In terms of such contracts, there's no reason why you can't have any clauses in an individual contract. And therefore, if you're thinking of recruiting somebody, and we know some players who have had checkered careers due to injuries and have had to retire, and you think of the likes of Jack Wilshere and so on, really talented players who have struggled to be able to put in 40 matches a season and therefore have been deemed to be a risk. That would normally be reflected in contracts. They are very much incentive driven. You've only got to look at Manchester City's wage bill last season in the Premier League when Manchester City won the Champions League and the Premier League and the FA Cup. City's wage bill went through the roof because you had all of these clauses kicking in. So for a player who has had issues in terms of injury, you could offer them a small amount of money, and that would give the player a degree of certainty. And perhaps that would be good from their point of view. The downside of that is that if you're going to link that to the number of matches a player plays, and you quite often see this when players have signed, say, a 2-year deal with a third-year option, it would normally be linked to often be linked to the number of appearances that they make before that option crystallizes. But sometimes you'll get the board of directors dictating decisions to the manager, which won't necessarily be in line with the manager's best wishes, or necessarily the best wishes of the fans and the people who are on the pitch. And we go back to Seth Johnson in terms of his move from Derby County to Leeds United, which of course is quite a legendary transfer. And the deal there was that Leeds United had to pay Derby County an extra £250,000 for every 15 games that Seth Johnson played. And when Ken Bates became owner, even though he seemed to forget he was owner conveniently at times, he said on one stage, we're not going to play him because I'm not willing to pay Derby County another 250 grand, even though the manager potentially would have wanted the player to play. So the more complex the contracts, the more non-football issues can come into play, because as we are seeing across so many aspects of the game, let's face it, we wouldn't have a show otherwise, it's money often is dictating football decisions, whereas in an ideal world, we'd like football to dictate football decisions.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out, Kieran, not for legal reasons, but it just seems fair that Peter Ridsdale always denies that he accidentally offered Seth Johnson 4 times as much as he was going to ask for in the first place. But he hasn't denied spending a fortune on white goldfish. So, swings and roundabouts. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Sin Hang Lai. This is our penultimate question. It's from Sin Hang Lai. It's a very good question. It's got a bit more detail in it, this one, Kieran. And Sin Hang Lai says, I have a question about pre-contracts. Let's say a player from Club A agrees to a pre-contract with Club B in January for a move during the summer transfer window. This move may or may not involve a transfer fee between the clubs, depending on if the player's current contract is expiring or has some years left. The player continues to play for Club A through the end of the current season. I'm wondering what protection may be built into this pre-contract to protect both clubs involved. If the player gets injured before the end of the season, can such a pre-contract be voided? And is there insurance involved for both parties?
Yes, I spoke to one of our secret agents in relation to this. And people not familiar with the concept of pre-contracts, and this very much comes into play if you are in the final year of your contract. Under FIFA rules and UEFA rules, you can move internationally to another club. So if I was playing for Manchester United, I got to January, my contract expires on the 30th of June, I could move to Bordeaux, I could move to Leverkusen, I could move to Ghent, wherever it was going to be, or in the sense that I could negotiate that contract from the 1st of January, and I wouldn't have to seek Manchester United's approval as a current player. This does, of course, create jeopardy, as Sing Hang Lai has rightfully pointed out here, in the sense of, what happens if I do my cruise ship in February and I'm out for 10 months? If you signed a pre-contract, that pre-contract presumably is there to protect the player, in the sense that they signed it in good faith. The buying club is acquiring my services on a Bosman in good faith. And is there any difference, therefore, to me getting that injury in February or doing my same cruise ship in the first training session with the new club? So there will be protection involved for the player. The buying club could try to insert a condition limiting their exposure, but then the player might say, well, look, I've got 4 or 5 clubs. I'm a decent player. I've got 4 or 5 clubs willing to sign me on a Bosman. I'll find somebody who's willing to accept the terms which are suggested by my representatives. So that's where, is there insurance involved for both parties? There are insurance policies in respect of players, but certainly when we have spoken to people in the insurance industry and also within the football industry before, the premiums tend to be quite high because an awful lot of players are out for an awful long periods of time as a result of it being a physical contact sport. So the insurers say, we can come up with a figure for you, but it's going to cost you a lot of money. And therefore, many clubs effectively try to self-insure by saying, right, we won't have the formal insurance, but we will set so much aside. And if we think that on average, one player we're going to lose early every 4 years, if we set that money aside, we should be able to cope with that. If you lose 2 or 3 players, then you've got a problem, of course. That's the nature of insurance.
It gets a bit confusing, Kieran, when you talk about our secret agent. Because when you talk about our secret lawyer or our secret physiotherapist, I know exactly who you mean. But then you start talking about a secret agent. I mean, we've got a secret agent. So we need to come up with a new word for our secret agent, or we should start naming people. But then they wouldn't tell us things, would they?
And they wouldn't be very secret, would they?
No, that's true. That'd be the opposite. You've blown that one there, Kieran. You're quite right. You should have been in MI6, Kieran. You'd have been a great. Oh, you'd be a great. You might still be a spot for all I know, Kieran. You could be. You could be under deep cover. You and Farage
back to Moscow.
plotting to. Yeah, you and Farage plotting to bring our Russian overlords into the country.
Right.
That'd be a good reveal, wouldn't it? A good Simpsons-style reveal.
Pull off the mask.
Andrew Phillip has our last question. And this is one for you, Kieran, isn't it? It's a proper lovely accounting question. Andrew Phillip says, you often talk about how the length of contract factors into how a player is shown in club accounts in terms of amortisation. This is fine when you buy player A. Player A has been busy, hasn't he? This is fine when you buy player A for £20 million over a 4-year contract. But what would happen if that contract was 4 years with the option of a further year based on performance? Is anything factored in for this 5th year, assuming the triggers are met?
Right. This is what's referred to as a contingency, and a contingency is in effect an unknown future event which has varying degrees of probability. So let's say that you, Kevin Day, sign a 4-year contract with Crystal Palace Football Club with an option for a 5th year. And the option is, provided you don't change your name from Kevin Day to that of anybody else, the 5th year kicks in. Okay? So there is. Now you say, well, that's virtually certain that you're not going to change your name. So therefore, under those circumstances, we'd say, well, okay, we'll amortise over 5 years. If the clause is that just going back to the previous question, that you play a minimum of 25 matches a season in the first 3 years or 4 years of your contract, you'd say, well, if we think Kevin's as good as we think he is, he will probably do that, but we don't know for certain. So under those circumstances, you would amortise your contract over 4 years. And the 5th year, effectively, the club is getting you for free from an amortisation point of view. And then if the clauses are more complex, you've got to win the Ballon d'Or. I'm not saying you wouldn't win the Ballon d'Or playing for Palace, but I wouldn't put it in the probable category necessarily. So it drops to possible and then remote. So you go through four layers of probability, which is remote, possible, probable, and virtually certain. And that would determine whether or not you'd amortise over 4 or 5 years. The vast majority of the time, it would be over 4 years. It would only be if the hurdle for satisfying that condition was so low as to a reasonable person on a Clapham omnibus would say, well, that's not really a hurdle at all. So let's look beyond, let's lift the veil here, and it's effectively a 5-year contract.
I have to say, Kieran, sadly, at this stage in my footballing career, changing my name is much more of a probability than playing 25 games a season. I guess it just might also explain why Uncle Terry never got that 5-year contract at Millwall. He was so handily full. Oh, we can't just sign you as Uncle Terry, mate. We're not going to have to some sort of name and a guarantee that you won't be changing it. No. That's why his football career went southeast, isn't it? Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that'd be very kind of you. And it'll get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter X, and you can find us on our YouTube channel. And we've got some lovely new content planned for that YouTube channel coming up soon, which is going to be very funny. And if you'd like to buy our book or our T-shirt, you can go to the same website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday with our news pod, which will include Villa, Chelsea, Everton, loving. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Thank you so much to everybody for interacting and giving us support in such a variety of ways. It is genuinely appreciated. There's a variety of ways which you can support the show. Patreon is one, where you can listen to the show advert-free and get access to the quizzes and our little Discord group, which has been a bit quiet recently. I need to get some gossip going on that.
Yeah, go and stir it up.
People entertained. But there's another way you can support the show, and it's to help us as far as the podcast providers are concerned. If you give us a review, it does make a difference to the algorithm. And I've seen the algorithms and how these things work. It's not just downloads. By all accounts, it doesn't matter what you say. So you could even say you'd rather have the show presented by Ross Noble and Roy Keane. I think that might be a rather surreal show, and with one of the hosts being a bit grumpier than the other.
That would either be the shortest pod we've ever done or the longest. I'd pay good money to watch the look on Roy Keane's face as Ross launched into one. I didn't know you could actually see algorithms, Kieran. You can see them. You can see them, can you?
Yeah, you can see them. Yeah.
What if you're special accountant? If you're special accountancy trained.
That's right. Yes.
I wouldn't be able to see them, would I? Is it like one of those optical things where you say, can you see 2 back-to-back squirrels? And I go, no, I can't. And you can straight away.
No, they're just formulae, an algorithm. It's just, I've seen the algorithm for Twitter popularity and what you have to do on that. Act accordingly.
But telling me to act accordingly, Kieran. I will act accordingly when faced with numbers, Kieran. I shall look at them blankly and think, I might need Maguire's help on this. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.